these disaster preparedness town halls, thanks to the wonderful work of our employees at the Department of Emergency Management. So I wanted to let you know today that, of course, we are dealing with multiple disasters here in Sonoma County, and somehow it's a little bit hard to even talk about flood preparedness when the ground outside is parched and dry and it's been almost 75 degrees, at least out here in Forestville for the past few days. And yet we have to be prepared. We are actually expecting a weak atmospheric river to come through Sonoma County in the next week or so. And we are getting into flood season. So it is always important to be prepared for whatever disaster might come next. I'd like to first suggest that if you have any questions, you put them in the question box through the function in Zoom, or you can add it as a comment on Facebook. And we'll be feeding those questions to our panel of experts here. Also want to let you know that to access Spanish translation, you will go to the globe at the bottom of Zoom and click Spanish. The link for the Zoom is in the chat on Facebook if needed. And then I would like to introduce Jordi, who will be able to repeat this information in Spanish for our Spanish listeners.
Bienvenidos a todos a nuestra reunión de Listo Sonoma, nuestra reunión de ayuntamiento virtual para estar listo para las inundaciones o cualquier evento de catástrofe de este tipo. Agradecemos mucho que estén presentes hoy en la noche. Parece ridículo que estemos hablando de lo que son inundaciones mientras estamos en una época de sequía, pero estamos esperando muy pronto lluvias que vendrán a continuación en las próximas semanas. Todos aquellos que nos estén acompañando en español, tenemos habilitada la función de traducción al español. En el icono de globo en la parte inferior podrán verlo, apretarlo y verán la opción en español.
Thank you so much, Jordi. And now I would like to introduce one of what I consider fearless leaders in Sonoma County, and that is our chairwoman of the Board of Supervisors, Susan Gorin, who has truly been through the most trying year, I believe, in Sonoma County's history and has led us through multiple fires as well as a pandemic. So Susan, take it away.
Thank you, Lynda. I really appreciate that warm introduction. And yes, you and I have been joined at the hip through the pandemic, homelessness, certainly power shutdowns and fires, 3 fires that burned both of our districts pretty significantly. And I think that this presentation tonight, this discussion is so important. And yes, I want to echo Lynda's comments about, seems like, what are we talking about? Flooding. We've been dry, record month. But we know that we could get pounded by rain over the next month or 2. So it always pays to be prepared. And although we're really going to be talking about flooding along the Russian River, which is very damaging, very distressing to so many people, we know that we have flooding issues in the Petaluma River Basin, as well as the Sonoma Valley Basin, as Supervisor Rabbit calls it, bottom of the bathtubs. And so pay attention. And if in fact we do have serious rainfall events, please be careful driving and pay attention to the roads that may be closed during flooding events. Doesn't have to be the Russian River to be dangerous. And of course, we know that Highway 37 has closed on occasion due to flooding as well. So pay attention to road closures and hazardous driving conditions. And I have to say, I'm going to be doing a little rain dance. I hope to get some moisture out of the rain this weekend and next week. So I'm so glad to have our panelists with us to give us some really good advice on how we can navigate through this. Steve Baxman, our Monte Rio Fire Chief, I think has not joined us yet. He's a little late. So I'm going to introduce Christopher Godley, who is the Director of our Emergency Services, Emergency Management Department. And boy, Chris, we're so glad that you're here, but whoa, what a workout you have had over the past 4 or 5 years.
It has. Our community's been through quite a bit. Hardly anybody in this county is untouched now by recent events, and especially now with COVID. And even as we speak, with the implementation of a new shelter-in-place order taking effect tomorrow, it is a significant time for the community to come together. And so I appreciate everyone literally taking a moment to think about what might happen in the future in terms of flooding. It's certainly been a big part of our history here in Sonoma County, And as both supervisors indicated, it's a significant challenge for us going forward as well. So I'm hoping that the information tonight will be helpful and encourage people to communicate, network, and get ready together as both individuals, families, and neighborhoods. I thought I'd share just a few things that might be of interest to folks here as we talk about flood and preparedness. I know there has been interest in our new Department of Emergency Management. We were created almost a year and a half ago officially. We have about 12 staff, which is a significant commitment on the behalf of county leadership. Most jurisdictions our size might have 3, 4, or 5 staff, but the board following the 2017 fires recognized that the game has changed and that we need to do more to not only ensure a good response, but an integrated recovery so we can heal and bring back our community as strong as possible, as quickly as possible. We run about $2.5 million, so we're relatively robust compared to most counties, but it's a small insurance payment, as I like to think, relative to the larger budget here in the county. But it's money well spent, and certainly I think we've kind of proven our mettle here in the last 12 months, especially. Our mission is to basically assist the county and everybody inside it, cities, special districts, community groups, private sector, to basically be prepared for and be able to respond to major emergencies and disasters, whether they're natural hazards like flood, fire, and earthquake, or perhaps a cyber attack. It's our job to kind of get people ready and ready to go when things do happen. Some of our key, most visible program deliverables are the county's emergency operations plan, which coordinates not only county departments, but again, the efforts of cities, special districts, the private sector, community-based organizations, kind of basically trying to write everybody into the same sheet of music as you were. And that emergency operations plan has a number of specific functional areas, like for those of us who have been through power shutoffs, we needed a map to find our way through and how to deal with that appropriately and keep everybody safe. Our department also is responsible for developing and managing the county's Emergency Operations Center, which is basically where folks go to basically come together and problem solve during a time of crisis. And certainly we do that quite a bit lately. We've had 15 activations of our emergency center, county staff in from other departments, and even outside the county, community-based organizations. We bring these folks together. We've done that 15 times in the last 2 years. And then also we're responsible for making sure the county can keep its lights on. County government can't fail. You just can't put a closed sign on the front door for 2 weeks. So we've got a number of functions that have to run 24/7, or especially the next day. So we make sure they can continue to operate even if there are power shutoffs or in a COVID environment. In terms of flood preparedness, there's a number of planning efforts that go on in addition to the county's emergency operations plan. We've developed a Russian River flood response plan. We completely overhauled and revised that in 2019. So it's pretty fresh and up to date and covers basically how we respond to flooding all the way from Cloverdale all the way down to Jenner. We also do an annual flood workshop for our first responders and stakeholder organizations to take a look at the weather that's coming in the next 3 months during our winter season, review our emergency plans, take a look at what's changed in terms of new tools or new changes in flood control. And we actually held that flood workshop just yesterday for our first responders. We have about 70 participants in that workshop. And then finally, we focus heavily in flood preparedness on individual and community preparedness. Where do people live? What are their greatest concerns about flooding? Is it localized flooding? Is it the river itself? How can we help them to get organized and be prepared, both as individuals and again, as communities? And then I'd also mention in terms of flood response, moving into an actual event, we now have a 24/7, meaning to maintain vigilance and ensure that should events begin to occur, like sudden rainfall or a rise in the river, we've got someone that's keeping tabs on that and can quickly activate and bring in more and more resources. We're also responsible for the alert and warning program that the county maintains. Now, many of you might receive alerts on your cell phone through the Wireless Emergency Alert System, or WEA, or perhaps it's the SOCO alert system that you've subscribed to, and you get either text, voice, or email messages telling you that there may be a danger in your area. So it's our job to make sure that not only do those systems work and deliver that information, but people are aware and prepared to take action once they receive a warning. And then finally, again, we are responsible for the County Emergency Operations Center. This is a significant investment. We've got about 75 staff in a full activation that could be working on a single shift, and it can get pretty crazy, but it's a good place to find out what's going on, decide what needs to be done, and make sure we've got the resources that support our first responders in getting that work done. And then finally, once the waters begin to subside or the rains begin to taper off, we move and quickly try to establish the path to recovery. Certainly coordinating re-entry into areas that may have been evacuated is a significant challenge, as we've recently seen with our fires. We're also supporting initial efforts by the county to open a local assistance center. That is, make sure that we have boots on the ground, people that are ready to directly meet with individuals that may have been impacted by flooding or winter storm damage as quickly as possible. Literally, as soon as the waters go down, we rush in to make sure we're ready to provide those resources, and all resources, not just county government, but community-based organizations, private sector, so everyone has a one-stop shop to go to if they need help. And then finally, we're responsible for coordinating with the state of California and the federal government to bring in potential state and federal resources. I would highlight, in Sonoma County, floods are not a novelty here. We have flooded constantly here. There's some pictures here in the 1800s, 62, 69. You can see, tell me if you detect the trend. There's water all the time here in Sonoma County. And we saw significant flooding in the 1930s, 1940, and 1955. And response continues to evolve as more and more people move into the area. We're finding that need for emergency assistance has continued to grow. As the weather continues to change, potentially climate change, we may see a dish we saw in 2019 near Sebastopol, in Healdsburg, as well as up near Cloverdale. And we could certainly expect to see flooding issues in other parts of the county, like the Petaluma River, as well as Rohnert Park and Cotati, all around the Laguna de Santa Rosa, as a matter of fact. And just to highlight, these flooding issues have become more interesting and more extreme. I haven't even put on here the year 2019, but in 2019, instead of having 2 winter storms back to back that produced flooding, we had 1 major storm. That's the first time we've seen that in living memory, where 1 storm dropped enough rain to produce flooding that was significant countywide. And the areas at risk are both the riverine, those are areas along the Russian River, tributaries that flow, creeks that flow into the river, like Santa Rosa Creek, but also the coastal and bay areas. There's often vulnerable to flooding, either localized flooding or due to high tides. We might have some issues out there, especially out near Bodega Bay. And the potential losses are significant. In the last 25 years, we have seen 8 fatalities, as well as over $300 million in damages to property and a little bit to the environment as a result of these flooding issues. So it's not insignificant. It's created a real challenge for folks that need to maintain flood insurance. And it's going to continue to be a pressure point as the effects of climate change become realized. And then finally, just I would suggest for folks some preparedness tips that I'd like to share is find out where you live. If you live in or near a flood zone, check it out at our socoemergency.org website, or ask your neighbors about the history in the area if you've just moved in. You may not be near a river or a lake, but maybe there's an intersection down the street that floods every year when the storm drain can't keep up. It's good to understand what's going on in or around your house and the roadways that lead in and out of your house. And then know when you might want to evacuate. Don't wait for that phone call. If you feel that there's a risk, that you know the water's coming up, or you may need additional time to get out and take care of yourself, children, a warning, and certainly don't wait for that knock on the door. And then finally, make sure you've got a plan. Talk it out with your family. When are you going to evacuate? But what are you going to take? We've got a great checklist on evacuation to-dos, things you should take if you've got time on our socoemergency.org website. And it's important to know where you're going to go. We do offer shelters in many cases, but they're not very great places. They're very austere. They're providing a basic level of service. So if you've got the ability to bunk down with a buddy, you know, across town or a family member, that's the way to go. Now, it's important to note this year with COVID, that's complicated things. So it's going to be important not to just go crash at your buddy's house. You may need to go get a hotel room or take other steps to maintain your social distancing and keep yourself and your friends safe from COVID. And then finally, I'd ask everyone to check your property. What's on it? Have you got the drains cleared? Are there any dangerous trees that may need to be taken care of right now before the winds come up and the ground gets soft? And then also taking a look at the hillsides in and around your house, or even just cleaning up the gutters and making sure that your property drains well will go a long way to minimizing property damage. So those are just some of the tips we have. We've got a great deal of information for you later this evening, as well as again at our socoemergency.org website. And thanks, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chris, so much. For whatever reason, my screen flipped, and so I'm not seeing the rest of you, but question, is Fire Chief Baxman with us at the moment? Lynda, is Max here yet? Or Steve?
I do not believe he has joined, no.
Okay, why don't you take over the introductions?
Wonderful. Are we going to do questions at the end, or are we going to be doing them in the course of the conversation? I thought maybe we were going to be asking a few questions after the presentation, but I want to double check on that.
We could do that, and it's up to you to make that decision.
Okay, well, we can just keep going and then circle back to questions at the end. So I get to feel very honored to introduce a person that I consider a friend, as well as, quite frankly, a local hero. And that is Bruce MacDonell, who I think has ferried more stranded Russian River residents, perhaps, than anyone else in the lower Russian River during our flood events. You've probably seen him in the Press Democrat in pictures with his canoe carrying folks to get their groceries or away from being stranded. So I would love to hand the mic over to Bruce MacDonell, who is the president of the Russian River Wild Steelhead Society, as well as a dedicated steward of the Russian River.
Thank you, Supervisor Hopkins. I appreciate that warm introduction. I don't consider myself a hero. I consider myself a neighbor helping a neighbor. And if you hear nothing else from me tonight, that's my message. Help thy neighbor. Let me qualify myself a little bit at first. My family residence, our family property dates back to the 1940s. My grandfather, when he built our cabin, he built the floor level to be a foot above the highest water plane to flood level in history. And I moved into that cabin February 1st, 1986. So that was just enough time to get unpacked and experience the biggest flood that we know to date. And it was mind-blowing, and it changed my life forever. And since then, I have been in every flood from 86, the 2 in 95, 97, 2006, and 2019. I've learned a lot about what to do with myself and my house and my belongings. And I'm going to share a little bit of what I do to prepare for myself and my family and my house. And I can just speak from my experience. So currently, I live at the end of Neely Road. I live in the floodplain. Like a lot of us, we have elevated houses with areas underneath. A lot of us, including myself, use that area for storage. I currently have a lot of stuff down there. I've got a shop. I've got an art studio down there, and I'm a contractor, and so I have a little bit of materials and like a hardware store down there. But I plan throughout the year to make sure that I can get all that stuff out of the floodplain. And the first thing I get out of floodplain is I take inventory, and the first thing that if the water level's coming up, the first thing I move is all my toxic stuff, all my motorized stuff, my lawnmowers, my rotor tillers, the wood splitter, all that kind of stuff, gas supplies, paints, cleansers, all that stuff. I have an inventory in my on a sheet in my head, and that's the first thing that gets to higher ground is all that stuff. So I think that's going to be echoed later on tonight, but I'm going to repeat that again. First thing that leaves is anything that's going to pollute the water when the water comes up. So I have a plan, and I don't wait to be warned. I've been through enough of these floods in my life to know that it's going to flood. It's just a matter of when. And I have a system downstairs. I have shelving all through my downstairs. All my stuff is in storage containers. I have a story pole on one of the corners of the shop, and I can see where the water is going to come to. And I pay very close attention to the NOAA predictions, very close attention to the NOAA predictions. And floods are a little different than fires. I have time to get it all out. And I can't stress the importance of getting it all out, because every single thing that I get out, I don't have to clean up. I don't have to throw away. It doesn't enter the environment. And I'm almost obsessed with being ready for floods after all my experience. But I also have a plan with my neighbors. All my neighbors in the Annandale community, we talk, and I know where the out of danger zone is. And I've got neighbors across the street, and they have agreement with me, and I have an agreement with them. I get to use their high water safety as a place for me to move my stuff to. And in exchange, I keep an eye on their house while they're not there. I know the elevation of the low spot in my property, and I know that when the water's going to hit, just below 40 feet, that it's coming in. And so I know that. And I know also that around 32 feet, that Neely Road, at the end of Neely Road, is going to start flooding over. And I know that. And I warn my neighbors, and we make plans, and we help each other. And then if I know that I'm not going to have to move everything out of my my shop area, then I'm going to help people get across to safety. And that's what I do. Let's see, I mentioned the story pole, and the first thing, like I mentioned before, and it's worth mentioning again, the first thing I get out is all the toxic stuff that I have in my yard, down below in my shop. I can't stress that enough. And I hope if you don't hear anything else other than that, get that stuff to higher ground, and be safe, help my neighbor, and God bless.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Bruce. And I believe that Susan is going to be introducing our next panelist.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I really appreciate turning it over to me. It's my honor and great privilege to introduce a person that we all know and love, and that is the Assistant General Manager, Michael Thompson from Sonoma Water. Michael, we're so glad that you're with us tonight. Every time I have a question about water or sanitation, I turn to you, absolutely. So help us understand about flooding and how the water agency works with all of the folks in the community on these issues.
Well, thank you very much for that, Susan, and thank you everyone for being with us. Yeah, just a little quick background. The Sonoma County Water Agency, I just would like to start. What we do work to, well, I'd say we don't prevent flooding. There really isn't anything you can do to prevent flooding. We have a little more humility than that. And based on our experience, but our main efforts are focused on reducing the frequency and magnitude of the flooding. And we do that primarily through the mechanism of our stream maintenance program. And through our stream maintenance program, we conduct annual maintenance on streams throughout Sonoma County on about 75 miles of streams in which we have either easements or actually own the creeks. So our preparation work is done primarily through between June and October 15th. That's a period of time when we are allowed by the various resource agencies to go in and do work in the creek. During that period of time, we're out of the main nesting period. It's outside of a time when we might see steelhead or salmon migrating. So that's our window. We deploy many different crews throughout the county to do our maintenance. And our maintenance is, there's really two main types of maintenance we do. The first one consists of vegetation, primarily vegetation management. And when we do vegetation management on a stream, what we're looking for is to establish this vision we have, which is one in which a stream has a nice shaded canopy that will protect the bottom of the stream bed, allow, if there's water flowing, allow that water to stay cool, allow it to stay healthy, allow it to be healthy for the environment. But we do that in such a way that we trim off, or we encourage the trees to grow big and form these nice large canopies, and then trim a lot of the understory so that when the time comes when we need the water to flow through these creeks and through these flood control channels, they're able to flow beneath the canopy with minimal obstruction. The second major activity we do is sediment removal. Many of the streams that we have throughout Sonoma County are on valley floors, and it's a place where just naturally sediment will drop out that is mobilized from the surrounding hills. And under a natural process, it's very natural for sediment to settle out in these valley floor streams. And what typically would happen is a stream would accumulate sediment and fill up. And then at that point, the stream would find another place to go and cut another channel. Since these are in urban areas, we really don't want creeks trying to go to another location or cut a new channel, because generally there's a business or a residence there. So our goal is to keep the sediment managed in these creeks so that we don't have a large accumulation, so the water can flow freely and use the full capacity of these creeks. Like I said, our main preparation activities occur before there's flooding through mainly the summer months. One of the other main things we do is post-flood work. And so after it's safe to do so, we'll go back into various creeks. There are particular ones we own where we do inspections on, and we'll look for debris, especially during the first big rain of the year. We have that kind of a first flush event where a lot of the trees or limbs or other things that have been accumulated in the waterway all flow down during that first flush, and they tend to form big debris blockages in the various creeks or bridgeheads. So once it's safe to do so, our crews go in and remove those blockages so to be ready for the next storm. So as a resident or someone in the, living in the county, living near a creek, something you can do to actually help us prepare both for the onset of flood season and to help us after a flood is passed is actually just to call us and let us know what if you see something that needs to be addressed. And we can check to see if it's a creek we have an easement on. If we have an easement on it, odds are we have approval from the resource agencies to go in and remove that blockage to reduce the risk of flooding. And I would recommend if you want more information on that, to visit our website, our Sonoma Water website. You can go to the flood protection section, and in that we have maps of all of the various flood control zones. The county's kind of split into different major watersheds, and in each watershed it'll show the creeks in which we have easements and where we're allowed to do maintenance. So again, we really rely and we really value the eyes of the people in the community, the eyes of the people who live near creeks to help us keep them safe and to minimize the threat of flooding. So that's what we do, and look forward to answering questions at the end. Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you very much, Susan Gorin, and thank you very much, Director Hopkins, for hosting this today.
Thank you so much for that great presentation, Mike. And now I have the opportunity to introduce one of our environmental champions of the Russian River. And if we're sort of going for superlatives, I'm not sure if there has been anyone who has dedicated more of his life simply to the improvement and the benefit of the Russian River and its watershed. Don McEnhill is the Executive Director of Russian River Keeper. And his sole goal really has been to take care of the Russian River, to steward that river, and to hopefully improve it for future generations. So Don, I'm really looking forward to hear what you have to say about flooding and the relationship that we've got with the Russian River.
Thank you, Supervisor Hopkins. And I'm inspired by the river, and that is our mission at Russian River Keeper, is really to spread that and inspire everyone in the community to protect the Russian River forever. A group like ours, I mean, I manage a staff of 15. I've been doing this for 20 years. I really appreciate our supervisors because we sometimes hold them accountable. We're sometimes a little shrill, and they're always there supporting the river, but we can't do it without the support of the community. So that really is our focus, is to help people understand what they can do. We operate an advocacy, education, restoration, and a clean team program. And I'm really thankful to tonight, because like drownings, the worst water tragedy we have, we can prevent the human and environmental toll of flooding. The county's leadership here in hosting this event is really important. We've learned how much pain and sorrow we can avoid with preparation. So we are talking about this. I mean, we're about ready to send out a newsletter talking about going into a 2015 like drought, and we're still talking about flooding. So thank you for your leadership. I'm not the flood pro that a lot of people like Bruce are, and many people. Virginia Strong, one of my board members who've been to so many flood events. But since I've started, I've been through 6 flood events of various magnitudes and learned a lot, just like Bruce. And I really, I'm so thankful to have Bruce on this call, and the county should think about bottling him up and having him work to go out in the community and help people who live in flood-prone areas prepare, because that is how we reduce the toll. And most of our work in the floods, like Bruce, always starts, we're a conservation group, but our work starts with helping people in the community. They're our neighbors. There's a disaster, we got to pitch in. And so the things that Bruce shared about preparing and getting things out, just like the fire, and our family has go bags. We have bins, plastic bins with our, because they don't make good wooden ones that fit in our car. But we have bins to carry our personal belongings and things we have precious. And Bruce talking about the toxic things. One thing that certainly Mike Thompson and people who work with water all the time can tell you, in simple terms, water moves things. I remember in 2015, I was kayaking out of our park property in Guerneville, and I found myself quickly helping the owner in Bill Lodge secure a tractor that was floating out into the channel. And he got a chain to me, and I floated out and tied it on, and we pulled that thing back. Water's powerful. So you can imagine the things we find: propane tanks, swing sets, pesticides, herbicides, your garbage can and everything in it. If you can't move it, there's a lot of ways people can secure it. And today we're still removing debris left from the 2019 flood. But what we don't see is what one of the local pro offshore paddleboarders told us about. She actually paddled about a mile offshore of the Russian River mouth in 2019, 3 days after the flood. And there was literally swing sets. There was automobile parts. And she got horribly sick with her partner she was paddling with. So there's a toll on the ocean, and that preparation ahead of time, thinking, as Bruce said, with those a couple days, those many hours you have between a flood advisory, a flood warning, and then an evacuation order, you have time to move things. So that is really key, and building preparation into our lives is just critical right now. We've learned how much that can help us in the fires. So I think this conversation about learning how you can be informed before floods, how you can learn about when you need to get out, where the problem spots are, where to land, what to take, are invaluable. And I hope this is the first of many conversations in the community, and look forward to everyone's questions. And again, thank you for the county's leadership, and to the fellow panelists for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. And I just want to make a brief acknowledgement that I do know that the county announced some very serious news earlier this afternoon regarding the stay-at-home order, which is a decision that was driven by data that we have been receiving, and that Dr. Mace, our public health officer, has been reviewing in real time. She's been in constant communications with our local healthcare facilities, and they were starting to express reservations regarding the increasing number of patients. So I just wanted to acknowledge that because I know that we're receiving a lot of questions about that on Facebook, but also this is a town hall that's about flood preparation that was scheduled, I think, months ago in anticipation of the flood season. So we are going to be focused on the flood preparation for the question and answer session, and always happy to answer questions by email and provide additional information at separate events regarding the stay-at-home order. So with that, we will turn to questions. And Chairwoman, would you like to kick off the Q&A section of this?
Thank you so much. I'm not going to read the questions. I'll let you field the questions, but I did have a question, since you and I have experienced extreme fires rampant through our districts this year, sadly, distressingly, that many people are concerned about the impact of rain on those watersheds. And there's probably, I think there are 4 or 5 watersheds in my district alone, and probably 5 or 6 in yours. So rain this weekend, next week, what does that mean for the health of our watersheds, and how have we prepared for the rains with employing folks to put up the wattles? But tell us what to expect. And maybe that's a question for Chris Godley.
Sure. Happy to jump in. We're looking at a relatively modest rain. We call this the Goldilocks rain. It's not too little, it's not too much, it's just right, which means it will help our fire ravaged areas recover. It will help the soils begin to relax and begin to be more absorbent of future rainfall, for example. It will also help the vegetation, especially the grasses, begin to reestablish themselves and make those hillsides more secure. Of course, it also presents challenges environmentally by bringing in fire debris, especially ash, into our waterways. So there's a significant environmental concern in the area. And unfortunately, we do have a great deal of experience in responding to this kind of hazard following the 2017 fires and the 2019 Kincaid fire. So to that end, an environmental watershed task force has been working since the first fires, especially the Wall Bridge here in August, to begin to develop and move into implementing plans to protect the watersheds by installing erosion control measures, such as what we call wattles. Those are those big kind of fire hose kind of things made out of straw, as well as spreading other kind of absorbent materials on the ground like straw. This will hopefully address many of the more sensitive areas, especially environmentally sensitive areas, and especially those areas around burned structures where there are more substances, more toxic substances that could present a challenge to the environment. We would like to see more of this kind of rain this winter. Hopefully that would be the case, but in 2019, unfortunately, as was the case, we saw a significant single event that produced a tremendous amount of rainfall. It's that more significant rain event that we are always on guard for here in Sonoma County.
And back to you, Lynda. What kind of questions are we getting?
Yeah, and that was a great question to kick it off on. I'm also wondering if Dawn had anything to add, being the environmental expert with respect to fire recovery in the watershed, before we go to the other audience questions.
Yeah, and thank you. You know, most of our work, we're working on preventing toxins and sediment from getting in the watershed, really focused on watershed protection. But as we're out, I was just driving way out from Mill Creek all the way to Austin Creek, way out in your district from Gores via dirt roads. And there's Gelati working with for county roads, clearing the ditches, opening up the culverts, and preparing for more water to happen. I think Mike can really speak from the water. Sonoma Water can speak to, you know, just what the potential is and how to recognize a potential flash flood event. But it certainly has to do with rain intensity. But I think that you know, we're hopeful we're going to get a similar rain. It's a La Nina year. We're not seeing any big signals. There was potential big rain end of the month. That's not looking so hot. As bad as a drought would be on one side, it certainly will get us through this period without any potential debris flows or things like that. But I'd love to, you know, defer a bit to Mike because, you know, the Sonoma Water has an incredible network of prediction for creek rises and flooding, as he mentioned earlier. And after the Tubbs fire, their network was invaluable in recognizing when we have potential extreme events. So I'll hand it over to Mike.
Well, sure. Thanks, Don. Yeah, and Jay Jaspers and our water resource management group has worked extensively, Chris, I believe, with you and with the work team to first of all identify values at risks and also increase monitoring through a lot of the work of understanding the the strengths of the rainfall events we're going to get, as Susan and Director Gorin and Director Hopkins both mentioned. We are expecting, as you mentioned, also a weak atmospheric river. Our ability to be able to identify these events coming to us so we have time to prepare, I think is really invaluable. And I think that's a network, and that modeling continues to evolve and get better. And I think that's really one of the big advantages we have versus, I would say, a decade or two ago, if these events were to happen, is our ability to be able to predict where the rain's going to, where it's going to fall, and to be able to provide better advance notice to people who might be, potentially might be at risk from such rainfall.
And just to follow up and probe a little bit more on that question, we did have two questions from a member of the audience that, really relates to personal safety and the potential for flash flooding and how to respond in the event of a flash flood. So the questions were specifically, if I were caught by a flash flood and couldn't get out right away, what should I do? And then a similar question, if my children were in school during a flash flood and the route home after school was blocked by the flood, then what should I do? And I think that second question is actually one that happens on a regular basis out in West County, where you drive through and then, often early on in the storm, when we're seeing some of those blockages that I think Mike talked about earlier, you see localized flooding even before the river rises. And it can create very swift flowing water that's often murky, so you can't tell how deep it is. And it often cuts out routes. And we all know where they are, right? It's a low spot on 116, it's Green Valley Road, it's all of those places. So I would, open it up to the panel who would be best equipped to respond to those. Don, I see you unmuting, so maybe you want to jump in.
I'll jump in because I forgot to say something. That was a really good question for the person who asked it in Spanish, and I'd love to respond to it. I lived in Texas for 9 years. They have flash floods in Texas. You hear when there is flood potential there, it's just constantly, every radio station is broadcasting, don't drive through water you can't see. Floods carry away cars. When I talked about how powerful water is, they move cars 2 feet of water. I watch cars flow down rivers in Texas. So I think the most important thing in trying to, ideally, we don't want you caught in a flash flood. So the most important thing I forgot to mention was pay attention to weather warnings. When you hear the word flood on the weather radio or the news station or the radio station you listen to or in the newspaper, talk with your family. Maybe the kids stay home that day, but that's a good day to maybe talk with your employer. Maybe we stay home. I don't want to drive through potential flooding. One of the best things we can do is keep ourselves out of harm's way by heeding the warnings. So, but I think trying to get to kids, you don't want a second tragedy and a parent being a great parent trying to get to their children at school and being lost in a flood because they tried to cross a creek or Wohler Bridge or Wohler Road or something. We can prevent that. Know that the school will be taking good care of your children. But if for some reason you do get separated, the best thing to do is wait until you can see that road before you drive to that school.
Thank you so much. Would anyone else like to add to that? We do have a slogan that we like to say in Sonoma County during the rainy season, which is turn around, don't drown. Because really it is not worth the risk, and it is not worth the risk to your life. It is not worth the damage to your car. It is not worth the risk to the lives of our first responders who have to go and rescue you if you wind up stranded in the water. But maybe Chris has a few more things to add about personal safety during flooding events.
Sure. And just to underscore the driving issue, more people die of drowning during flooding by driving their car into the water than being caught by the water at home or at work. So literally, we could reduce by more than half the number of fatalities if people would just not drive through the water. The other thing I'd underscore, I've had some experience with, is you just assume, because you can't see it, you're assuming the road is still there. I've personally seen roads get washed out, the car drives in and, hey, there's no more road. So the person thinks it's only a foot deep, and lo and behold, it's not. It's tragic because I understand it could be a challenge by turning around. Maybe there's an alternate route, but it's a lot longer, or maybe there's no alternate route and you may have to just wait it out or seek assistance or rescue. But it's better to do that than to take a chance and drive into those waters. The other thing I'd also mention for flooding is that a lot of people, as was mentioned, kind of venture out, get in their kayak and head out. These flood waters are dangerous. There are chemicals, there are biological contaminants in there, especially in some of the lower areas of the Russian River, and you could become deathly ill from exposure to those contaminated waters. And there's also an incredible amount of debris. If you're walking around in your backyard and you think you know where everything is, well, things have moved around a little bit and you could suddenly find yourself in big trouble. So we urge people just to stay out of that water. It's the safest and the simplest thing to do. And certainly make sure your pets, and especially those kids, make sure they do the same thing. Everyone wants to go exploring where it looks like it's relatively safe, but please understand there's some menace there in those waters. That's about all I've got. And then SoCoEmergency.org, we got a lot of tips.
Yes. Well, speaking of biological contaminants, that was actually a good segue into our next question that we have from Issa Day, which is there any plan for decreasing the impact of the raw sewage that flows into the river from the Russian River District during floods? She states that in 2019, there were an estimated 200,000 gallons at Riverside Drive and an additional 348,000 gallons at the Vacation Beach Lift Station. This is an ongoing problem with our sewer system. As a longtime resident, I dread watching all of the sewage flow into the river. So I'm wondering if, Mike, if you would be able to address some of those concerns and talk maybe about some of the measures that the Russian River Sanitation District has put into place.
Yeah, I can. And thanks for the question, Issa. Just as a little bit of background, when the much of the Russian River Sanitation District's service area goes underwater during a major flood, a large part of it, and that creates really severe challenges for us. What we put a number of measures in place many years ago, where as the river is coming up, we actually valve off many of the lower lying properties, Johnson's Beach, and there are about 20 properties, as I recall, that we actually cut off service to that are one of the first ones to flood. So we take those measures. We also encourage people to, we've seen in the past where people will, property owners want to drain their property and they think of opening the clean out because then the water would go away somewhere else, and that goes into our system, which also overwhelms our system. So there are things I'd say the you know, our customers could do to actually help reduce the load on the collection system. The other is, more specifically though to this issue, it's partly an operational issue where we are looking at some options, some pumping options, working with the Regional Water Quality Control Board to see if there are some other options for how we operate the system, which we hope and would be intended to reduce the frequency of magnitude of any overflows. And it's similar to flooding where the system as designed, since it is in a floodplain, I don't know that it would be difficult or close to impossible to eliminate all overflows. But again, we are looking at both some maybe equipment and operational changes to help reduce the frequency and magnitude of those overflows during flood events.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And the next question I think would be a good one for Bruce to answer, which is, you know, folks are just asking about how they can best prepare for floods, and if there are any groups or places that you can go to get educated about preparing for floods, you know, or any kind of groups that would maybe potentially support you in the midst of a flooding event.
Thank you. That's a good question. I would say groups to look for advice or preparedness, obviously Sonoma.org, the Water Agency, any of those have a lot of information on their websites. As far as personally, for myself, I have a neighborhood in the Neely Road area, and I know a handful of what I would call neighborhood watchdogs, or people I go to group in the neighborhood, and that rallies the neighbors next to them, and together collectively as a neighborhood of friends that we all pull together. And that's the best advice I got as far as gathering a group is reach out, know your neighbor, know how you can help them, know how they can help you, ask the right questions, be prepared, and be safe.
Thank you so much for that great advice. And it looks like maybe Chris has a few things to add too, as places that we can go for resources.
Actually, yeah, I certainly would encourage people. And again, SoCoEmergency.org has a neighborhood groups kind of list on our preparedness tab, but basically connecting with your neighbors, just your next door neighbors across the street. That small micro network basically is what's going to carry the day. You'll find out very quickly who in your immediate area needs help, who might need assistance, maybe in evacuating, and who's got resources, who's got the generator, who's got the gas-powered margarita blender, whoever, I mean, I make light of it, but it's that connection at that personal level that really will carry the day. I certainly would echo also Bruce's idea that connecting with that larger community organized to prepare for emergencies or COPE network is really important in these communities and neighborhoods, and potentially even joining and taking part in a community emergency response team, CERT, or CERT for short. There are CERT programs up and running in Bodega Bay, Russian River Fire, Sebastopol. Our county is looking to foster and support more of those as we go forward. And those programs offer you the opportunity to develop a lot of education and training on how to put out a fire, do first aid, rescue people, how to communicate in a crisis, and potentially even serve as a member of an auxiliary response team. So certainly I would look forward to people that have resources and skills and abilities, plug in and make them available to your neighborhood and your community.
Great advice. And while I do not have a gas-powered margarita blender, I do admit to owning a bicycle-powered grain mill. So if you're in the need of flour in the midst of a flood, you can come over to my garage in Forestville and get your exercise too. So it's a buy one, get one free. There's a great question regarding where things fled. So the question is, if I didn't get flooded in 2019, can I be assured that I am not at flood risk, or does the river change? And one thing that I would say before turning this over to Don McEnhill, who might be able to explain a little bit more about just the natural course of rivers and how they function, is that we actually had places in 2019 that flooded that had not flooded in recent memory, really in living memory. And that was in areas of Austin Creek. And it wasn't the actual river height, right? Because we've had river heights higher than that, while people are still, in living memory. But it was actually the backup that we saw and the tremendous pressure on the tributaries to the Russian River that caused flooding in homes that had not experienced flooding, in generations, quite frankly. So with that note of, obviously, sometimes things do change or weather patterns do change, I would love for Don to explain a little bit about how rivers.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I've learned mainly through our advocacy on gravel mining is that the river is ever evolving, and areas where the channel is wider can become narrower. And when that happens, it pushes more water up higher or moves it faster. And certainly what we're learning also combining in climate change is we're having these extreme events. I mean, we might be tipping back into a long-term drought, and that 2019 flood might be an aberration in a 10, 15-year drought. So, but what we learned, I think it was 2018, when we were kayaking in the Safeway parking lot in Hillsburg, and a lot of the downtown merchants suffered some extraordinary damage in just a brief rainburst right over our little watershed, which is very small. But I think Bruce's thing about the historic knowledge is important, and our go-to is always going and looking at the gauging stations on the Russian River and watching those, and at the same time going out and looking, okay, well, what does 45 feet mean where I live and on the road that gets me out of here if things get higher? And I certainly invite Mike, again, he's a water guy on a much more technical level, to jump in. But that's a very astute comment, that how do we know? Well, you can get a very strong indication from history, but always be prepared. Even if someone tells you, oh, that property never floods, just ask Bruce McConnell what happened in 1986.
Yeah, Don, thanks. I think what you said is really right on the mark. I think the thing to remember that creeks and rivers, they're really living systems, and they aren't static by any means. And so it may be that we've seen it before, where there was a landslide up higher in the watershed, all that material goes down and now really changes the river. In 2018, I think it was, that Geyserville and Healdsburg all saw flooding they had never seen before. And so you'll see that just from, changes in what's in the river, the sediment in the river, and then in smaller tributaries, it really, sometimes it'll just take a tree floating down, getting wedged, and then having debris build on that to form a dam. And then you get flooding there where you haven't seen it before. So I think, really what you hear Bruce and Don and Chris saying is that really situational awareness is key, and knowing that these are really living systems that that can change really quickly, and without really much warning. And so the key thing is be prepared beforehand, have an escape plan, and have good situational awareness.
Great advice. And it looks like Bruce has something to add as well.
So in my basement, I had it surveyed this year because the numbers didn't add up for me, because I knew where the historic floodplains or the flood events had happened, because I could see where the water had stained the building behind some of the framing members, and I mapped them out. And there happened to be a survey crew next door to me, and I said, hey, can you survey the slab in my basement here, just so I have a number? And so they did, and the number was just around 46.8, something like that. But I know that at 42, it's coming in. And what Don was talking about is when the valley chokes in a little bit, the water has to rise a little bit to go over it. And that's what's happening in my neck of the woods. So even though NOAA says, hey, the water's at this level, I know at my house, it's really going to be like waist higher, wherever it's going to be. So again, echoing what Don says is when water volume gets pressed down, it pressed in, it raises up, and knowing that is important to knowing how high the water is going to come into your property.
That's a great point. And I think it's also worth thinking about the Russian River watershed as a whole. And when you look at it, it drains just a absolutely huge, vast expanse of land. You know, much of Sonoma and Mendocino counties feed into the Russian River watershed and into the Russian River ultimately. And so you have this huge, giant drainage basin. And then when it hits the lower Russian River, it becomes extraordinarily confined, right? It's going through these narrow gorges, you know, with sort of steep hillsides on either side. And so that's what really causes fundamentally the river to be so flashy in terms of the fact that it can rise fairly dramatically and fairly quickly. And, you know, one of the things that Don has talked to me about on numerous occasions and that I really think a lot about is how we have also put the river in a straitjacket. We've, you know, stopped it from breathing in many instances by building up infrastructure right on either side of it. And so we've lost some of the floodplain that could normally sort of absorb or allow the river to spill out. And I feel like I'm not doing as good of a job as Don does, but I'm wondering if you would speak to that a little bit, Don.
Yeah, thank you, Lynda. And one of the things that I was thinking of as Bruce was talking about, and you were talking about how the lower river confines the river, you know, at the Wohler Narrows where Wohler Bridge is, it backs the river up into the middle reach between Wohler Bridge and Hillsburg. Similarly, as water piles up in the main stem, it backs water up into the Laguna. And certainly there was some flood events that no one saw. I mean, we almost had the Santa Rosa sewage plant go underwater. That caught everyone by surprise, even the best experts. So things are changing. One thing that's really changed, that has changed history, is every time we build another house, put it up another rooftop, another parking lot, or things like that, that combined with taking a river that used to be a half a mile to a mile wide and putting it in a channel that's 600 feet wide, that water is going to show up all at once in the wrong places. So one of the ideas that we've really been working towards, and we have a big project to convert some of the gravel pits, which are creating environmental issues for the river, into floodplains. In fact, I was just on a call with Mike about that, actually Don Seymour and some other folks from the agency. And that's really important because that's the ultimate. We're going to have bigger floods and we've shrunk the room the river occupies. And so there's going to be, and the good thing is these projects can not only widen the floodplain where we have opportunities like remediating these gravel pits, they also, you know, they're going to slow down, absorb the floodwaters. They create an off-ramp for sediment, for pollution from upstream that comes down. And ultimately during the dry season, they can be public parks. So that's something you're going to hear more about in the next couple of years, because we're going to be going through permitting for the biggest floodplain restoration that's going to add 360 acres back to the river and store a lot of water for a short amount of time. But that can mean a big difference if we do more projects like this. So thank you. You know what really plucks my heartstrings is getting this river back into a resilient shape so it can survive climate change.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your work on that project. And I think that's going to be something that's just very exciting and has benefits in terms of climate resilience, in terms of habitat, all kinds of things. We do have another question about safety, and this is more about safety after you're returning home from a flood. And, you know, it's almost like a badge of honor in the lower Russian River of how many times have you been red tagged because your home, you know, went underwater and it had to be inspected before it was considered fit to occupy. Again, this question in particular is about the risk of electrocution from electricity in the water. And I'm wondering if maybe, Chris, this would be something that you might want to tackle. You know, what steps should people take when they are returning to their home after it has been underwater and submerged?
Sure. It's electricity is scary, and water. They just don't mix very well. And so I certainly appreciate the common sense that it took to ask that question, because a lot of folks may overlook that. If you were returning to a flooded home, it can be an emotional time. Let's be honest. You may have lost quite a bit, but it's important to stop and put safety first and make sure you're addressing it at all times. And specifically for electricity, we're recommending you go home only in daylight so that you can actually see any damage or any hazards that may be now present in your yard or in your house. If you actually can do so, and there's no water, and you can do so, you can go ahead and turn off the power if there's water's been in and out of your house. But if there's standing water in your house or in your yard, or especially near the electrical panel, don't do that. You're going to need to call an electrician. You need a professional to go in, assess what's safe, and they can then turn off the power. If you turn off that power in a flooded home, it's important to also have an electrician check that system before turning the power back on. A flooded electrical system is very dangerous. It can short circuit, it can cause fires, as well as potentially create an electrocution hazard in the house. So I appreciate the question, treating it very seriously. When in doubt, call a pro. They know how to do this safely and make sure that you're safe and your family's safe. I'd also suggest that when you go home, be sure you're wearing protective equipment, clothing, boots, gloves, masks. If the house has been closed up for a couple of days and there's been water in it, you can assume there's mold there, as well as, of course, the water being contaminated by chemicals and sewage. And then throw away all that food. Anything in the fridge needs to go away, as well as anything that's come into contact with the water. Even cans of goods, I'm suggesting don't take a chance. They may have been contaminated on the surface, and by just handling the can, you can contaminate the food that you take out of that can. So don't take a chance and just move that food out of there. And be sure you're, again, watching out for those that may not be as safe. Maybe it's a neighbor, but more likely it's going to be kids or even pets. Make sure that they don't go walking into hazardous conditions as well. So there's a lot there about how to recover, and that's not some of the information that we put out now on SoCoEmergency.org, but also when there is a flood, we re-amplify and really try to reinforce that message with our information that's available on how to do so safely.
Thank you so much for that, Chris. And I think the next question is actually back for you as well, so you'll be in the hot seat again. A couple of questions that I think are very relevant to immediate flood response. We have so many single lane roads in West County. Can we expect early warnings for floods to help us get early? What type of communication will be used? And then a follow-up question to that is that we struggle with internet service and cell service out in West County. So are there any updates on improving connectivity for West County residents? People are concerned about receiving information during emergencies, especially knowing that sometimes, right, we have power outages at the same time we have floods, just like we have power outages sometimes at the same time we have fires, obviously for different reasons, you know, it being a rainstorm.
No, alert and warning is really a challenge in winter storms, because those winter storms can bring those high winds, which will knock down power lines, telecommunication lines. The trees can come down and block roadways. So even though we think we may know how to get out of harm's way, we'll suddenly find that route blocked. Or there may be a car accident. We certainly see that come up all the time as well. And so we are looking to both reinforce the capacity of these communities to evacuate by identifying and helping improve evacuation routes. We are looking at potentially ensuring that we can maximize those routes to handle traffic, but ensure that we can also help people identify alternate ways of getting out of an area if they need to evacuate. But as the question really alludes to, the key to all this is getting out early. We will be continuing to exercise a broader use of alert and warning systems earlier during these events to warn you of a potential flood event. Now, you may not actually flood, but we have to look at a worst case scenario. We can, like the fires here, in our experiences in just the last 2 years, especially out in West County, we've evacuated a whole lot of folks. And I'm here to tell you, I know people think that perhaps it wasn't needed or warranted, but I sat there in the middle of that emergency operations center at midnight, and I could have sworn that fire was going to tear us up. Because the winds were there, the fire was there. The same conditions apply with flooding. If that rain pattern stalls, for example, and it dumps 2 or 3 or 5 inches of rain locally, where it wasn't really forecasted, we could suddenly have a localized flooding hazard. And so we err on the side of caution, and we urge everyone to pay attention, but also we begin to issue evacuation warnings earlier, as soon as public safety chiefs like the sheriff's department or fire chiefs determine there's a hazard. We'll put those warnings out through our various technologies, like the wireless emergency alert system on cell phones, SoCo Alert, and now we're making better use of the NOAA Alert weather radio system. We just did the first nationwide activation test last month. So NOAA weather radios are going to be another way to overcome the potential for loss of wireless or wired broadband connectivity. We are looking at other ways to provide evacuation warnings to the community, but the best thing you can do is stay in touch, stay tuned, get that battery operated radio out, turn it up to that local station, and find out what's going on in your neck of the woods. There's a lot of information out there, but it's going to take some effort to actually go out and seek that information and not just wait for it to show up on your front door.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists for attending this town hall this evening. We did make it through all of our questions. And, I don't want to ask for a boring winter, because Chairwoman Gorin, at the start of her chairship, asked for a boring year, and it has been anything but. And on that note, I would love to ask Chairwoman Gorin to wrap us up with some closing comments before we bid everyone good night.
I also want to thank all of our panelists, our expert panelists tonight. And Dawn, I really miss seeing you. It's sad that I don't get to see you more often. Thank you to our community members for asking such important questions. With everything that we have going on today and this year and our fear about droughts, it's amazing that we have anybody on tonight's panel discussion talking about flooding. But we know that we could have it, and we need to be prepared. And I want to echo all of the comments about personal safety that our panelists advised for you today. Cleanup, and we know that if we do have significant rainfall, we're so grateful that community organizations have been out there with the wattles catching that ash flow before it enters into our watersheds. It is very important that we want to wish you all well. We want to wish you a safe and happy holiday season with Goldilocks rain. I like that. I'm going to use that. We're going to hope for Goldilocks rain this weekend and this next week. And I really want to thank my co-chair and all of the folks for helping to organize tonight's discussion. Really important. Be well, be safe, wear your facial coverings, and please, please avoid gatherings. Thank you.